Finally, after years of you requesting it, I'm bringing you part 2 of the tutorial for the Behringer X32. There's going to be more entries coming in the future, so make sure you check back. But today we're going over mix buses and effects. Let's get to it. So the first thing you're going to notice is that this is not an X32 compact like I used in part 1. I don't really have access to the compact anymore, so I'm just going to use the standard. But they're almost the same exact board. Everything I'm going to show you on this will apply to the compact as well. The only difference is really between the boards is that the compact has half as many faders in the main bank, half as many analog inputs on the back, and then if you remember I showed you that if you want to do a bus send, you have to hit the Mix Bus button, and then it brings up all the controls on the monitor here, whereas with the X32 standard, you actually have dedicated sends to the mix buses, which actually makes it a lot easier. However, internally, exact same boards. So let's go ahead and get into a couple principles. Again, you'll remember in part 1, I briefly touched on the topic of the difference between DCAs and mix buses. I'm gonna go over that real quick with you. So a DCA, digitally controlled amplifier, it's a remote control for the other faders. So for example, I have DCA 1 here is my drum DCA. If I hit select, it highlights everything that I have connected to that DCA, which is all my drums. Okay, so if I turn this fader up or down, it's the equivalent of turning up everything I have attached to it up or down. Okay, it's not, however, an audio path. A bus is an audio path, so there's no dedicated audio going through this DCA. Now, what does that mean? Well, with a mix bus, you're actually creating a new mix, which then you can manipulate that audio. So some common examples of that would be if you wanted to send all your vocals through a vocal mix bus and then compress them all together, you could put a compressor on that mix bus, or your vocal reverb or echo. Those are also uses for mix bus that you can't do with a DCA, right? You can't put an effect on a DCA. It's just a remote control. So that's the difference between that. The second principle we're going to go over is pre and post fader. And this is going to address the number one question you guys had for me in part 1, which was how do I send effects to the monitors on stage? We're going to address that as we go over this, okay? So in the signal chain, there's multiple different places that you can tap into to send audio to a mix bus. So, for example, if I wanted to send, there's a vocalist on stage, he's got monitor mix 1, I want to send him his vocal. So we'll just select my mic here, all right? We'll pretend that that is his vocal. Select bus bank 1 through 4 right here and turn it up in 1. Let's bring up my bus sends. You can see it going up in bus 1. Okay, so now the vocal is in his monitor. Okay, now let's say he's got lead in one song and backup in the next, and you want to turn his vocal down when he's doing backup. Well, you don't want that to turn down the amount of his vocal that goes to his monitor, right? You want him to be able to hear himself evenly the whole time. So in that case, you're going to do that bus send pre-fader so that whatever you do with your fader and your mute does not affect their monitor mix. So when would you use post-fader? Well, this gets to y'all's question. Okay, how do I send effects to monitor mixes? Okay, so right here I have my microphone selected. My echo is on bus 15, so I'm going to select my last bus bank here, turn it up into 15. Let's bring up my bus sends, so it would be going into 15 here. Okay, that goes then into the echo unit and then returns stereo right here onto 13 and 14. So go basically to your effects returns, select your effects return, and then you're just going to treat it like you would anything else that you're sending into his monitor, right? So his monitor is 1, so I'm going to select bank 1 through 4, and then I'm going to turn it up just like I did his microphone in bus send 1, right? And again, if you're on the compact, you're going to hit the mix bus button, that'll come up over here, and you're going to send the return to mix bus 1. However, you want that to be post fader, right? Because again, when they stop singing and they start talking between songs, you want to mute the effects sends, right? So that you don't continue to hear the echo and the reverb as they're talking. Well, it'd be super distracting for them if they're talking to you and yet out of their monitors, they're hearing reverb and echo, right? So that you actually want to be post fader so that when you mute the effects for the house, it also mutes those effects for their monitor. All right, so how do you change it to be pre or post fader? Okay, so you're gonna hit your view on your mix bus section, right? And that's gonna pull up this on your monitor, which users of the X32 Compact should be very familiar with because that's what they have to use to get to their bus sends, right? And then you select it in blocks of 4, just like I showed you in part 1, but we're doing this with bus send 1, right? So it's already there. I'm gonna page down or layer down, and now it brings up these 2 knobs. You can only change sends in groups of 2. So here you see I have the tap for send 1 and 2, and here for 3 and 4. So if I just turn this knob, it goes to pre or post, or there's a couple different options as well. You can take it before the EQ if you want, if you don't want everything you do on the EQ to affect their monitor, or you can take it post EQ if you do want your EQ to affect what they're hearing in their monitor, right? So this is where you control where in the signal chain it goes to that mix bus. And this is on a source by source basis, right? So if I want my effects return, again, to be post, then I would select it, hit the view on my mix bus section, come over here onto send 1, and then change it to post. However, if I want my vocal to be pre, I would just select now that vocal, come over here to send 1 and set that to pre. So you can do it on a source by source basis. Another great example of why you want to have your mix bus sends on pre-fader rather than post-fader is if you're doing a second mix. So for example, here we have a control room in the back where there's a computer that's running logic, where there's an audio engineer running the mix for the stream. However, if that goes down, the front of house engineer here has to be able to really quickly create a mix to go out to the live stream, right? And I know that since COVID, there's been a ton of churches that have started to do live streaming. So if you want to do a live stream mix from the same console, you want to have that to be pre-fader as well. There's a few exceptions of things that I have on post-fade, but for the most part, I want it to be pre-fader. And why is that? Well, because the mix in the house and the mix going to my headphones, which is how you would do the stream audio, they're not the same. If I turn something down in the house, I may not want it to be down in the headphones. So let me show you how you would do that real quick. Over here on my buses 1 through 8, I have 7 and 8 designated as my stream output, right? And then I would map that to, or route that to a physical output, which I'm going to show you how to do in part 3 of the tutorial. And then, like I showed you in part 1, the easiest way to do it, select that bus and then select sends on fader. And now this is your mix for that bus or for the stream. And so now you can change the faders however you want, and that's going out to the stream and not to the house. The way you would listen to that is by soloing up your stream mix, which again, here is bus 7 and 8. So I would solo that, plug my headphones into the side here, and here's the volume knob for the headphones. I would put those on, and then I would do my mix for the stream. Okay, and mix it for the stream. Here we go. It's mixed. I like it. Take my headphones off, turn sends on fader off, and now we're back to the house mix. Now you want to be careful when you're doing that you don't accidentally start mixing for the house when you think you're mixing for the stream, but that happens to everybody occasionally, so don't worry about it. And then if you want to do it the super slow way, you can just select each source, come over here to my bank 5 through 8, and then again 7 and 8 are the buses for the stream, so I could just turn it up here one at a time, but that takes forever. So sends on fader is way easier. And then what I'm going to show you here in a second is how to make your assignable buttons over here into a shortcut. So what I've done is I've taken this assignable button and made it so when I hit that, it selects bus 7 and 8, which is my stream bus, and it also turns on sends on fader. So it immediately brings me to my stream mix. And then when I'm done with that, I just hit this same button again. It turns it off, brings me back to my house mix. Let's talk about effects inserts. In the old analog days, there was actually a jack on the back of the console called an insert, and that would send audio out into an outboard effects unit and then bring it back in on the same jack and the same cable. Okay, the X32 doesn't have an insert jack. It's doing that all inside the console. It'll allow you to do 8 stereo effects units. And again, this is emulating old school outboard effects that you would have next to your console. So you bring those up with the effects button, and you can page left and right and look at all the effects units you have. So there's 2 main different kinds of effects. There's dynamic effects. That's going to be something like a compressor or a gate or a de-esser, something like that. And then there's timing-based effects, which is like a reverb or an echo, things like that. And you're going to want to insert these in different places in the signal. And I'll show you why here in a second. So with a dynamic effect, typically you're going to insert that directly onto the source. So I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to pull up my vocal 1 right here. You see it automatically switch to the insert that I have on it, which the X32 limits you to only having 1 insert per channel. It can be a limitation sometimes, but that's what they've limited you to. So, all right, vocal 1, I bring that up, and it automatically brings up my de-esser. What's a de-esser? It is exactly what it sounds like. It helps bring the S's down. So if you're boosting the high end on a vocal and the S's start to get harsh, you can insert a de-esser onto that vocal, and then it will actually compress just the S's as they're singing or talking. So very useful tool. Like I said, every insert is stereo or dual channel. So I have it on channels 23 and 24 for my vocals 1 and 2. Again, that's directly on those channels. If I bring those up or down, the de-esser comes up or down with it. However, with timing-based effects, you want to insert those onto mix buses, which is how the X32 is set up by default anyways. So if I bring up mix bus, let's bring up all the way through 16 here, 9 through 16. I have 15, again, like I said earlier, is my echo. So I actually have my echo. Let me scroll over to it. All right, but I can select there. There we go. My echo is inserted on bus master 15. And that way, if I want all my vocals to go to that echo, I send those through the mix bus 15. So I'd select my vocal, go to mix bus 13 through 16 there, and then I would send it to 15 here. And then that's sending it to my mix bus right here, which goes into my echo. And then I can bring my vocal up and down without affecting how much of the echo I hear, and I can bring bus 15 up and down separately to affect how much echo. So you don't really want to insert echo or reverb directly onto a channel, because then again, if you bring it up or down, it's always going to be there. You can't just mute the effect and just hear them without it. So timing-based effects, always on mix buses. Dynamic effects, most of the time directly onto the source. So what if your vocalist gets up and they have a particularly harsh S, but they don't grab vocal 1 microphone, they grab vocal 4 microphone, and you have to change what channel the de-esser is inserted on? How do you do that? Well, let me show you. So you've got your effects tab up. You're going to page all the way over to the left to home, and then you select with the up and down buttons exactly what effects unit you want. So I'm going to select my de-esser, and then these 2 knobs right here allow you to scroll to turn what channel you want that effect inserted on. It's that easy. Earlier I showed you I have a button assigned right here that will, in one touch, flip my console from the front of house mix to the stream mix in case I'm doing both at the same time and need to switch back and forth really quickly. So I'm going to show you how to do that real quick. Over in the Assign area, hit the View button, and that'll bring it up right here to the home screen of the Assign section. That shows you what each of these encoders and buttons are assigned to. Now there's 3 banks, A, B, and C, in the Assign area. Right now we're just going to worry about A. So I'm going to page over to set A. Right, and the first column you'll see is the color. This lets you change the colors of these LEDs here. And then the second column is which encoder or button you are configuring. So right now it's on encoder 1, that's this guy. And you'll see in section 2, or the next column, it says type. So I have mine on effects parameters. So the next column over right here, I get to pick what effects unit I want that encoder to control. So I have it on effects 1, that's my reverb unit. The next column here, then I get to select what parameter in that reverb unit I want this encoder to control, so I have it on my reverb time. So anytime I turn this encoder, it's going to change my reverb time. I like to leave the timing stuff for my effects accessible at all times so I can change it from one song to the next. So let's go ahead and go down to button number 9, that's this guy. You'll see that I have it on go to page there. And then the next one says sends on fader, or jump to page rather, and then sends on fader, and then it's on bus 7 and 8. Or it just says bus 7, but I have them stereo linked, so when I hit it, it brings up 7 and 8. So it's that easy. It goes to the page sends on fader on mix bus 7 and 8. So when I hit that button, turns on sends on fader, and you'll see here it selects bus 7 and 8 because they're stereo linked. It's that easy. I highly recommend it if you have to do 2 mixes as the front of house engineer. Next, I'm going to show you how to assign mute groups. Mute groups are super convenient, really helpful for muting a lot of things at one time. So if you watched part 1, you would have seen that I like to mute my effects sends and not my returns. So when people start talking after a song, it doesn't just cut off the reverb tail. And I give a good example of that in part 1. Go back and watch it if you haven't seen that. But really easy to do. So I'm just going to hit the mute groups button up here next to my monitor. And then I'm going to hold the mute group that I want. And you'll see on my bus sends here, it highlights the select button. Those are all the ones that I have assigned to this mute group. If I want to assign more, I can just come over here and hit select. It's that easy. When I'm done, I just hit the mute groups button up there again. That turns that off, and you're ready to go. Now, you can assign things like vocals to your mute groups or drums, stuff like that. Personally, I don't like to have all my vocals on a mute group because occasionally when I come over here to mute my effects, I accidentally hit the one next to it because I'm watching the stage or something. And so I don't want to accidentally mute all my vocals. But if that's something you want to do, then that's how you do it. If you have any questions, leave them down below. I try to get to as many as I can. Make sure you check back soon too, because we're doing more entries in our series for the X32. Next time we're going over routing. We'll see you then.